Well, welcome to a new Harry's Garage video, and this one is going to be a bit of a different video because you can see there is not a car behind me. I'm going to talk about the UK government's EV policy, and in particular this zero emission vehicle mandate that we have in the UK. And what on earth am I talking about? This is this mandate that the UK government introduced that 22% of all new car sales in the UK in 2024 have to be pure electric, zero emission. And this is only a UK mandate, it's not Europe, just the UK. And the proportion of electric vehicles you have to sell as the years tick by get higher. So in 25, it's going to be 28%, 33% in 26, 38% 27, 52% 28, 66% in 29 and 80% in 2030. And the UK new government, Labour government, is saying they're going to introduce 100% in 2030. It's a nightmare. Already we can see in its first year of introduction the UK's car sales are not going to meet this zero emission mandate. And if you don't meet it, it's serious. A manufacturer will have to pay £15,000 per car sold above that quota. And it could be a big, big number. We have this organisation in the UK, SMT, Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, and they produce monthly figures. And if I look at those monthly figures, the latest ones for July just been published, and remember we're trying to hit 22%, well they show 16.8% of new car sales were pure electric. I think it's interesting though because that includes Tesla, and they sold about 26,000 cars a year in the UK. If I strip them out, well then it's 14.9% the figure. So way worse than 22%. And because they're a pure electric vehicle, they're only going to sell electric vehicles. It's those brands that sell a mix of pure electric, hybrid, normally powered cars. They're the ones in the firing line from this zero emission vehicle mandate. So why are we missing it so badly? Well, I think we've got to look at a few things that manufacturers are realising the introduction of pure EV cars into the UK market, into the world market really, is not going to be quite as easy as they expected. And the uptake here in the UK has started to slow. There was a dramatic ramp up and something happened, something triggered, which I'm going to go into, and we stalled, and we're not sort of buying them quite as vigorously, shall we say, as we were, say, 2-3 years ago. And there's a number of reasons for that. You've got to remember this zero emission mandate does not include hybrid vehicles or plug-in hybrid vehicles. And that actually right now is where the growth is. And I think there's a very good reason for that. And because of this slight change in customer uptake, manufacturers are really looking at their plans and what they were doing, and they've got to move, they've got to introduce more plug-in hybrid cars because that's what customers are coming into the showrooms to buy. And this is the same story across Europe as well. And I find it extraordinary that companies like Fiat introduced the 500e, pure electric version of the 500, and it didn't sell, it was high priced, and they're re-engineering it so it can take a hybrid drivetrain. Unthinkable. We've just seen Porsche launch the new electric Macan, but right beside it is a petrol-powered Macan. And the same story with the Cayenne, that comes end of this year. That was not in the plan when they first envisaged these EV vehicles. And if we're missing it by so much, 6-7%, the government has got to wake up and say, hang on a minute, this is not working. And the £15,000 fine is a lot of money. It's not a lot if you're buying a new Aston Martin at £200,000, and I quite admire Aston Martin and Lawrence Stroll. They're just saying, no, we're not doing electric, we're going to produce the cars customers want, conventionally powered, not even hybrid, and we'll just put the price up by £15,000 and take care of any potential fines that way. Again, that's me just illustrating the point, but being a low volume manufacturer, they don't actually have to meet the same legislation. But there is that attitude behind, slightly, there are ways around this rule, just jack the price up. I do wonder about Jaguar Land Rover, because they're selling Range Rovers by the dozen, a lot of hybrid ones, which do not count against this zero emission mandate. And they, on the face of it, will have to pay a big fine, but they are banking that they've got a lot of orders for the pure electric Range Rover that comes out end of this year. We should see it early 25. They get enough sales of that, well, maybe that'll work. But they also planned on having an electric Jaguar in the range end of this year, and that's been delayed, I'm hearing. They're just waiting for new tech to come on board, and that's the story in Europe, really. All these manufacturers thought they're going to introduce all these electric vehicles, and the customers aren't taking them up, and the tech isn't quite ready, and they're carrying on selling conventionally powered and a lot of hybrids rather than a pure EV. So why have we stalled on buying EVs here in the UK? I think it's a list of things. I think they were introduced quite early. There was incentives from the governments to do it, 100% write-off against tax. It became very much a business purchase. And they were high priced, as we all know, and we saw we have seen since their introduction massive depreciation. And I think everybody just at this point labels the Porsche Taycan, look how much that's lost in value. But it wasn't. A Taycan is a slightly strange vehicle in that it's not to British taste. SUVs obviously dominates the market, but that was a four-door executive saloon. They never have good figures for depreciation. They always depreciate very heavily. And so I think that's the wrong one to look at. What's going to be interesting is when the latest generation Kia and Hyundais that are on the market now, proving very popular, I don't think they'll depreciate quite as hard as some other examples that I could pull out, because they're the type of cars that should remain desirable. And I suppose it's also the worry that you know that the battery has a life. 10-year life is sort of what people has determined, and the closer you get to that 10-year barrier, the less the trade want to buy the car, the less public want to buy the car because they haven't got a guarantee on the battery anymore, and it's this colossal expense. So there's just unnerved with electric vehicles. The other thing was, I think they were oversold in the beginning. We have this test on range, and no one meets the official range figures. So there's a mistrust of them. They didn't actually do as many miles as we expected them to do. And also, if you are charging away from home on a fast charger, what price you are paying for your electricity is eye-watering compared to what you pay at home. It's normally a factor of times 4. I looked on the BP website, and they were around 79 pence for fast charging. The slower the charge, the cheaper it gets, but you're still going to be paying 50, 60 pence. And if you're paying that top rate and your car is only doing 2.5 miles per kilowatt hour, well, that's equivalent of your car doing 16 to 20 mpg. Very different if you're charging at home, where you're doing 65, 80 mpg. You know, we all know electric cars are cheaper to run so long as you charge them at home. But the uptake of electric cars, I believe, will never reach 100%, because that charging at home is critical to the success and your ability to run an electric car. To come out every morning and have a full charge in your car off cheap overnight electricity, who's not going to do that? If you're in that position and the range is non-issue, buy an electric car right now. But they think it's around 40% of households are in that position. The rest of the population do not have that ability to charge at home, and then they're exposed to the outside charge network, and you've seen the queues building there, you've got the super high price. It's no wonder they're not actually queuing up to buy an electric car. Another thing to realise in this mix of electric vehicles, although we're talking about the actual sales numbers this year and trying to get to 22%, you've got to look at actually how big the motor park, as it's termed, is here in the UK. And then that tells you a very different story of how the penetration of electric vehicles in the UK. At the moment, end of 23, it was 2.7 of the total number of cars actually registered here in the UK. Hybrid is 4.9%. It's twice as big already than electric vehicles. We are way off the target of getting to 80% and thinking there's going to be 80% electric vehicles on the road. That is not going to happen. As I've said before, Kia, Toyota and some other very clever people see the penetration of electric vehicles sort of topping out about 35% of the total market. And I suspect that is going to be the same in the UK because of that charging issues, charging at home, etc. And also the development of new tech, plug-in hybrids and hybrid cars, which is going to take up the rest of it and to be the majority of the car park, around 60-65%. And then a tiny little group of conventionally powered cars, perhaps running on e-fuels, the high-performance cars, these sort of cars will make up the final sort of 4-5%. That is a realistic makeup of the total motor park here in the UK. And to get to that point, we're talking 2050 plus, because our actual motor park at the moment is aging because we're not swapping our cars as regularly as we were. We like the tech we've got and we're keeping them longer. And I think that's a good thing too. So the long shot of all this, we have in this mad position where we've got companies like Renault, VW, Vauxhall, all creating really efficient hybrid vehicles. Clio, for example, their Clio, you'll get 60, 70 mpg out of it, little 3-cylinder engine in it, super efficient with a little tiny battery, 1.5 kilowatt battery in it. And they'll sell it to you for £21,595. And if they sell over their 22% quota in the UK, then the government will fine Renault £15,000 for selling you that super efficient Super Mini. The other end of the scale, you've got Porsche set will do a Taycan GT over 1,000 horsepower, £186,000, and the government will pat you on the head and say, "Well done, sir. That's just what we want you to do." It is madness, and this madness has got to stop. So how are we going to get out of this mess? Well, one, I think the UK government has got to rethink the zero emission vehicle mandate. Basically, chuck it in the bin. They've got to move to where EU are at the moment, because they have a much more achievable target. They're looking to reduce CO2 emissions from the cars by 37.5% by 2030 when compared to 2021 figures. Nothing to do with zero emission introduction. All they're looking at is a massive reduction in CO2 numbers by every manufacturer on a sliding scale. Makes much more sense and is achievable. Now, at the ban, they're introducing a ban on internal combustion engines in 2035, although that's just floating around because they've obviously allowed e-fuels as part of the programme. That's a very interesting development as well. You've got to think of it, I think, in a different way, not just look at the pure electric vehicles, you've got to look at the new energy vehicles as they turn in China, and that's the mix of the hybrid vehicles and battery electric. And if you look at that in the UK, currently we are selling 42% of new energy cars. Much higher figure, much more reflective of the real market, nothing to do with that zero emission vehicle mandate. That's got to go and concentrate on the new energy vehicles. That would make much more sense for the UK government. The second thing the UK government have got to do, they've got to consider all options to how to reduce carbon emissions from vehicles. And that includes range extenders, plug-in hybrids, hydrogen and e-fuels. The only downside of a plug-in hybrid, as far as I can see, having run one, is you also need a home charging system to make it work. And not everyone is going to have that home charging available to them. That's where the simpler hybrid cars come into their own, because they do not need to be charged. So you can park them anywhere on the street, you don't have to park at home, and they are super efficient, and they just help with a bit of electric and a very efficient engine technology. You do incredible distances on a tank of fuel. Isn't that what we all want? So it's no wonder customers are queuing up for them, and they're cheap to produce because the battery is so much smaller. So we haven't got this nightmare of producing these huge batteries and all finding the minerals, the rare earth material to goes into battery. On a smaller hybrid, it's so much easier, and you can roll them out quicker because you don't have to build such a big battery in it, and therefore you can populate, and they're cheaper as well, so the rollout will be quicker, and we'll all end up in much more efficient vehicles much quicker. Next, I think they need to consider all the other options being talked about on the periphery, and I'm talking about here range extenders, hydrogen and e-fuels. Range extenders could have a real key part to play in this game. They're the engineer's choice at the moment. There's a lot of development going on, there aren't many on the market, but there is no way of selling one in the UK with the zero emission mandate. Hydrogen I can see happening for heavy goods. Germany are very definitely on this scheme at the moment, and it's an interesting development there. And then e-fuels. Now I sort of know a bit about e-fuels. There's sustainable fuels and e-fuels. E-fuels I'll come on to in a moment. I have run all the cars you see here for 1 year on sustainable fuels. I've actually bought around 2,800 litres during that year, and basically there's nothing to report. There's no adjustments to make. The performance is the same, everything stays the same, and yet I've reduced the CO2 emissions from these vehicles in effect by 80%. The downside is it's 3 times the price of pump fuel. But it's there right now. That is a solution. Motorsport are going that way. Formula One goes there in 2026. And Porsche are on this as well. And they do something called e-fuels. Now, there's just a little bit on the background. Sustainable fuels, the fuel that I power these on is come from food and farming waste, if you like. That is distilled, hydrocarbons are removed. And it's 80% because the 20%, they still use a fossil element to the fuel to produce the performance fuels that I want for this car. 100% sustainable is possible, but it's very expensive, and it's easier to make a regular fuel for not performance cars. A base engine is potentially, you can do 100% sustainable with those. And it's the same story with e-fuels. I spoke to Matthias Morris, who heads up engine development at Porsche and e-fuels. Really interesting conversation at Goodwood Festival of Speed. They're getting big on it. They're very pleased with what they've achieved in their initial plant in Chile. That's going to be expanded, and there are going to be more plants around the world. They're talking about in Texas. I think he was talking about Australia. I might be wrong on there, but there are a number of new plants coming up in their regime. And they see this as a very good solution for their motorsport. I asked if he would go to Le Mans with it. He says it's tricky at Le Mans because we run a control fuel. So they see it for the Porsche Cup, but maybe that will get wider distribution. And just about every press car is filled with this e-fuel at the moment. So if you pick a car up from the factory, or quite a lot of the press cars here in the UK, it's actually running on e-fuels already. You don't know it because there's no difference in the fueling. You can just mix it with conventional fuels, but it's how they're reducing their CO2 impact of what they do. And I find it fascinating that they are ramping it up, and other manufacturers are getting in on the act as well. I saw BMW made an announcement on Friday. They think e-fuels have got a massive future as well. The environmentalists don't like e-fuels, so it's ridiculous. We should just use that power ourselves. But they are producing in Chile. There is no one anywhere near where those wind turbines are powering away. We have all that waste energy, if you like that. Wind power, you need wind power and water. Well, it could be solar, but you need water and renewable energy. And basically you're converting all that energy into a portable energy e-fuel. And you can say, well, why don't you just use the electricity? But it's the density of that energy that makes e-fuel so attractive. The energy density of a litre of fuel, or a kilo of fuel, is 50 times that of a battery. So they basically make the fuel out in Chile. It then gets moved around the world in containers on a boat. But you'd need 50 times bigger boat with a battery on it to carry that same amount of energy that you are in the e-fuel to move it as pure electricity. So it's just, think of it as making renewable energy portable and bringing it to where that energy is needed. That's what e-fuels do. Other things I'd like to see the UK government do: one, do not introduce any incentives to buy EVs. What gets me about the incentives that have been introduced so far, all they do is benefit the well-off. the 100% tax break. Well, you've got to be making massive profits to make sense of that one. Another one I'd like to see changed, I would very much like them to change the official test. No one takes any notice of the claim range on electric vehicles, and also the plug-in hybrid ones, completely unachievable. They've got to have a better way of testing these vehicles. And then finally, I want the engineers to come up with solutions. I don't want the politicians mucking around and muddying the waters. Engineers are clever people. I've got solar on this farm. I put a heat pump in 2007 in the house because it was great tech. It would reduce my bills. Nothing to do looking at how I'm going to save CO2 at the time. It was 2007 I put it in. It was because it was better tech. And we've got to get to a stage where we're choosing our cars because they're better than what they went before, rather than thinking, oh, I've got to do something. Government says I should buy an electric car. Well, that might be a good idea. And then find it doesn't actually fit our lifestyle. And then there's a new technology coming, vehicle to grid as it's termed. And I've got solar down at the farm. I'm producing more electricity at times than I'm consuming. I want that excess solar to go into my car, plug-in hybrid, and then I'm driving on that free electric power. And I also am intrigued that later this year I'm going to get a charger in that allows this vehicle to grid technology to work. I'm not sure all cars are going to be compatible with it to begin with, but it's very clever. And then what it will do is I will be able to use the battery on my plug-in vehicle or pure electric vehicle to power the house. There will be a two-way traffic down the electric cable between the car and the house, so I can pull from it when I'm not producing solar and then put back into the car when I've got excess solar. Proper clever tech. Engineers tech, nothing to do with politicians. That is the way forward. Let the engineers get on with it. They're going to get us out of this mess, not the politicians. So there you go, deep dive into what's happening with the tech, electric vehicles and zero emission mandates here in the UK and around the world. I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, well, keep watching, keep subscribing. More videos coming along very soon.